8 Marines hit the dirt in 45 seconds. Not one at a time. Not in rotation. All 8 at once. The combat pit went dead silent. 43 trained killers staring at a woman they'd spent 3 days laughing at. A woman whose file said logistics support, basic training. No combat history. The kind of record that gets you assigned to inventory spreadsheets, not a war zone. She wasn't breathing hard. She wasn't even sweating. Major Ethan Ward stood at the edge of the pit with his clipboard still in his hand, and for the first time in 11 years of running Iron Ridge Combat Training Center, he had absolutely nothing to say. If you're new here, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because the stories on this channel don't slow down. Drop your city and country in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning. The transport van dropped her off at 612 on a Tuesday, which was already a bad sign. Nobody important arrived at Iron Ridge on a Tuesday. Tuesday was admin day, the day replacement parts got logged, equipment got tagged, and the Marines who'd washed out of the previous cycle quietly disappeared with their gear and their pride. Tuesdays at Iron Ridge were for paperwork, not people. So when the white government van pulled up to the main gate and a single figure stepped out with a standard issue duffel and a manila folder tucked under one arm, the 2 gate sentries barely looked up from their coffee. "Name," said the one on the left. "Corporal Darren Ash, 19 years old, and already bored with the world." "Cross. Lena Cross." She handed over her ID card and orders without being asked. Card, ran it, glanced at the screen, then looked at her. Then looked at the screen again. "Your logistics." What it says. "Ma'am, this is Iron Ridge. This is a combat training facility. The course here is." "I know what it is." She took her ID card back. "Which way to the processing office?" Pointed left. She was already walking. Processing office smelled like burnt coffee and mildew, and the staff sergeant behind the desk, a heavy-set man named Tolliver, with reading glasses perched at the end of his nose, spent 4 full minutes staring at her paperwork before he said anything. "You're requesting assignment to the Combat Instructor Development Track." "Yes, ZCDT. That's right." Tolliver set the papers down very slowly. "Miss Cross, I've been processing intake at this facility for 9 years. The CIDT has had 214 candidates come through that door. You know how many of them were logistics? 0, I'd guess." 0. He leaned back. "You know what the attrition rate is?" 51%. That slowed him down. He hadn't expected her to know the number. "The physical standards alone, I've reviewed them. The combatives curriculum involves daily, full contact. I've reviewed that too." He looked at her for a long moment. She didn't shift her weight, didn't look away, just waited. "All right." He stamped the form. "Your bunk assignments in Building C. Formation is at 0600 tomorrow. Don't be late." "I won't be." She picked up her paperwork and left. Tolliver watched her go, then turned back to his desk, muttering something under his breath that she didn't bother trying to hear. Building C held 12 bunks in 2 rows of 6. By the time Lena arrived, 11 of them were already claimed. She took the last one bottom bunk, far corner, closest to the bathroom, the least desirable position in the room. She set her duffel on the mattress and started unpacking methodically, and that's when the room noticed her. Corporal James Brick Hollander, 6'3", 220 pounds of tattooed muscle from rural Kentucky, watched her from across the room with the kind of expression usually reserved for someone who's just shown up to a marathon in dress shoes. "You're in the wrong building," he said. It wasn't unfriendly. It was almost helpful. "Building C, bunk 12. She held up the assignment slip without looking at him. "Yeah, but this is the CIDT block." "I know." Brick looked at the guy on the bunk above his, a lean, dark-haired sergeant named Paulo Reyes, who had 12 confirmed close-quarters engagements on his record, and the calm eyes of someone who'd stopped being surprised by anything approximately 3 years ago. Reyes gave Brick a small shrug. Not my problem. No offense, Brick said. This course isn't built for me. Lena folded a shirt and placed it in the wall locker. I'll figure it out. Brick opened his mouth again, then closed it. He wasn't sure what he'd been about to say. Something in the way she moved, the complete absence of defensiveness, knocked the sentence right out of him. Reyes just went back to his book. The next morning, Major Ethan Ward stood in front of the formation at exactly 558. He was the kind of man who arrived 2 minutes early everywhere he went, because 2 minutes early meant you'd had time to observe, assess, and already know something everyone else didn't. He'd built Iron Ridge's CIDT from a regional combat drill into one of the most competitive instructor development programs in the Marine Corps. His methods were hard, his standards were harder, and he had a gift, which he privately considered a professional skill rather than a personal flaw, for reading people fast. He read Lena Cross in about 8 seconds. Young, female, compact build, 5'6" at most. Clean uniform, nothing flashy. The manila folder posture she'd had yesterday was gone. Today she stood like the others, hands clasped behind her back, feet at shoulder width. But she was at the end of the line, which meant she'd arrived last, which meant she'd either slept through her alarm or spent the extra 2 minutes doing something else. Ward stopped in front of her. Cross, sir. Logistics background. Yes, sir. Why are you here? The question wasn't hostile. It was clinical, the same tone he used for all intake interviews. Tell me something true about yourself. I want to teach, she said. What? Combat, close quarters, tactical decision-making under pressure. Ward let the silence sit for a moment. Around them, nobody moved. 11 other candidates stared straight ahead and tried not to listen, which meant they were listening to every word. You've got basic combatives. Cert on your record, Ward said. That's a level 1. You know what level 1 qualifies you to teach? Civilians, she said. I know. So why are you standing in my formation? Because I believe my training is sufficient for this program. Sir? She didn't say it with attitude. She said it like she was reporting a fact about the weather. Ward looked at her for 1 more second. Then he moved down the line. All right, listen up, he said to the full formation. CIT, Day 1. You know the rules. You follow instructions, you put in the work, you show me something real. You might have a future here. Cut corners, you complain, you let your ego lead, you're gone. No appeals, no second chances. Questions? Nobody had questions. Good. Physical assessment starts in 5. Move. The physical assessment at Iron Ridge was not designed to be survived through fitness alone. Course combined a 3-mile run over broken terrain with a 12-station obstacle circuit, a 400-meter weighted carry, and a final combat drill that paired each candidate against a training partner for 2 minutes of controlled contact. The running portion, most candidates handled fine. The obstacles separated the strong from the very strong. The weighted carry, 85 pounds of gear over uneven sand, started thinning the group by the halfway point. Lena ran near the back of the pack, not struggling, not pushing, just there, methodical, even-paced. A few of the others noticed and exchanged looks. She's not even trying. What they didn't notice was that she was watching them. The way Brick Hollander favored his left knee on downhill terrain. The way Reyes paced his breathing through the obstacles, controlled but at maximum effort, leaving nothing in reserve. The way another candidate, a stocky sergeant named Cole Mercer, ran like he was trying to prove something to someone who wasn't present. Every movement showing off, every rep counted out loud as if someone was recording it. She cataloged all of it without appearing to pay attention to anything except the ground in front of her. Combat drill portion came last. Ward assigned pairs by proximity in the finish order, which meant Lena drew a candidate named Sergeant First Class Douglas Crane, a lean, precise fighter, with a background in Marine reconnaissance, who carried himself like a man who'd spent a long time around dangerous people and decided he was more dangerous than most of them. Also respectful about it, which she appreciated. "You good with contact?" he asked, quietly enough that it didn't carry. "I'm fine. Just checking." He rolled his shoulders. "Ward's watching. Don't make it a blowout either way. He doesn't like easy. Okay, I mean it. He'll cut you if you're too good too fast. He doesn't trust people who don't sweat." She looked at him. "You're giving me strategy advice?" Crane shrugged. "I'm giving everyone strategy advice. I want good sparring partners for the next 8 weeks." The drill timer started. They went 2 minutes. Crane was fast, technically excellent, and held back just enough to make it look like a real exchange. Lena matched his pace without exceeding it. When the buzzer stopped them, Ward watched her for an extra beat, then moved on. "Good call," she said quietly to Crane. "He's going to clock you eventually," Crane replied. "Just make sure when he does, it's on your terms." 3 days passed. The CIDT candidates ate together, trained together, and spent the brief windows between sessions studying doctrine manuals, combative sequences, and tactical scenario cards. The shared exhaustion of the first week usually dissolved small unit friction quickly. When everyone was tired and sore, personality stopped mattering, and competence started. Except with Cole Mercer. Mercer was good. He knew it, everyone around him knew it, and he had zero interest in pretending otherwise. 6 years in the Corps, 2 overseas deployments, 1 silver in the Marine Corps Combatives Tournament, 2 years back. He hadn't gone for gold because he'd separated his shoulder in the semis and finished the match anyway, which in his mind made the silver mean more than a gold would have. He'd decided Lena Cross was a problem on day 1, not because she'd done anything wrong. Not because she'd talked back or shown off or caused friction in the barracks. She'd done the exact opposite of all that, which was somehow more irritating. She was quiet, unremarkable. She scored in the middle of every physical evolution, not because she lacked ability, Mercer suspected, but because she was deliberately sitting there, taking up space, waiting for what he didn't know. But the waiting bothered him more than the mediocrity would have. On day 4, during the first combatives rotation, Ward paired them. Pairing wasn't accidental. Ward never made accidental pairings. The training pit at Iron Ridge was a 30-foot square of compacted sand, bordered by low wooden rails. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't designed to be. The surface was uneven enough to punish anyone who stopped paying attention to their footwork, and the afternoon sun hit it at an angle that put one corner in shadow and the rest in full glare. Lena started in the glare. Mercer started in the shade. That, too, was not an accident. Ward was always testing more than one thing at a time. "Full combatives rotation," Ward said. "Contact is controlled. I see a shoulder lock go past the tap. Both of you are done." "Understood?" "Yes, sir," from both of them. "Stand by." Mercer bounced lightly on his heels, shaking his hands out, rolling his neck. The pre-fight ritual. Lena stood still. She'd positioned her feet without thinking about it, weight slightly forward, left shoulder angled toward him, hands loose at her sides. The whistle blew. Mercer moved fast. He was always fast, but this time he was deliberate fast, the kind of pace that said, "I know what I'm doing, and I want you to see all of it." He went for a collar tie and a hip throw, which was his go-to opener, technically clean, hard to stop if you didn't recognize the setup in the first half second. Lena recognized it. She didn't counter it. She let it partially connect, went with the direction of the throw instead of against it, absorbed the impact across her shoulder blades, and rolled out of it. Came up on one knee in the sand, shook her hand out, like she'd banged it on the way down. Mercer reset. The watching Marines relaxed slightly. She'd fallen. Okay. That made sense. He came in again, this time going low, a double-leg takedown, the kind built for someone significantly larger than his opponent. She dropped her hips, caught his shoulder with both hands, and redirected sideways. He hit the rail instead of her, bounced off it, and turned around, looking genuinely irritated for the first time. "Good," Ward said from the edge. Flat. Not praise, just acknowledgement that something happened. Mercer stopped playing. His third approach was different. Slower on the entry, which was deceiving the slowness, was the setup, not the real move. He feinted to her left, watched her shift weight to compensate, and went hard right into a clinch, leveraging his full body weight advantage. He had at least 60 pounds on her, and he used all of it, driving her sideways, across the pit. She hit the sand hard. This time she didn't roll clean her elbow, caught the edge of a high spot, and she grimaced, real, unmistakable. The watching Marines breathed out. There it was. That's what they'd been waiting for. "You good?" Ward called. "Yeah." She pushed up on one arm. The elbow was scraped, not broken. She tested the joint without making a production of it. Call to continue. "I'm continuing." She stood up. Sand on her uniform, a thin line of blood on her elbow, and the expression of someone who had not yet begun to be annoyed. Mercer tilted his head slightly. He hadn't expected her to get up that fast. They went 3 more minutes. Mercer took her down twice more, once clean, once where she slipped, and he capitalized on it. Each time she got up, each time she offered nothing back beyond basic defense and controlled exits. When Ward called the rotation, Mercer walked off the mat, already talking to Brick Hollander about something else. Lena walked to the water station, washed the sand off her arm, and pulled a small notebook from her cargo pocket. She wrote 4 lines in it, folded it closed, and put it back. Nobody asked what she'd written. That night, Building C was quiet past 2,000. 200, except for Brick Hollander's snoring, which had already become background noise to everyone who slept within 30 feet of him. Lena didn't sleep. She lay on her bunk for 20 minutes after lights out, listening to the sounds of the building, settle the HVAC cycle, the distant footsteps of the Firewatch making their rounds, the faint radio traffic from the security post near the north gate. When the rhythms were stable and predictable, she got up. The training annex behind Building C wasn't officially available after hours. The door was locked with a standard keypad cipher that the candidates had all been given at intake. It was meant for early morning use, pre-formation. Nobody had specified that it locked at any particular time. She had the space to herself for 2 hours. What she did in that space looked nothing like what she'd done in the pit with Mercer. The movements were faster, committed. She ran through transition sequences, the kind that blended striking with grappling, takedown defense, and control with the specificity of someone practicing something done 10,000 times and were now. Sharpening the way you sharpen a blade that's already sharp. Small adjustments, fractions of angles, the gap between good and invisible. She ran position drills against the padded dummy in the corner until her shoulders burned. Then kept going. She practiced falls all variations, from all positions, not the controlled training room versions, but the hard, realistic versions that assumed the floor wasn't cooperative and your opponent wasn't finished when you hit it. 130, she stopped. She sat on the mat against the wall, drank half a water bottle, and looked at the ceiling for a while. There was a photograph in the breast pocket of her civilian jacket, which was hanging in the locker back in Building C. She didn't need to look at it. She knew every detail of it. A man in his late 50s, somewhere in a desert that could have been 3 different countries, grinning at the camera with a coffee mug in one hand, and Uastin in one hand, and a battered tactical manual in the other. "Don't let them see you," he'd told her once. "Not until it matters. They think they know what you are. They stop watching. And the second they stop watching, it's when you become exactly what they don't expect." She turned off the annex light and went back to bed. Day 5 brought the first formal scenario, evolution. Ward set them up in a mock compound, 4 connected rooms in the training facility's built environment, which was a fancy way of saying a cluster of plywood and concrete structures that had been shot at, thrown into, and dragged through enough times to look authentically destroyed. The scenario was a personnel recovery op, one candidate per team, tasked with locating and extracting a simulated casualty from a room marked with a red flag against two opposing force Marines playing the bad guys. OP4 Marines were not candidates. They were instructors. This distinction mattered because Instructor OP4 at Iron Ridge did not go easy. Candidates went one at a time. The results were observed, recorded, and would eventually be used to build individual training plans. But right now, they were being used for something more immediate, establishing the social hierarchy of the group. Mercer went fifth and turned in a textbook performance. Clean entry, rapid threat identification, controlled use of force, successful extraction in under 90 seconds. Ward gave him a single nod. The other candidates clapped. Mercer managed to look modest about it for approximately 4 seconds. Lena went 11th out of 12. She stood at the entry point, a plywood door frame with a cracked lintel, and listened to the OP4 radio chatter from inside for a count of 5 before entering. Nobody else had done that. They'd gone fast, gone loud, or gone careful, but they'd all gone immediately. Ward noticed. He made a mark on his clipboard, but didn't say anything. She went in low and quiet, which was different from the crouching entry most of the others had used. It put her below the sight lines that the OPFR had set up in the first room and gave her 2 seconds of positional advantage before either of them reacted. She found the first OPFR instructor and controlled him against the wall before he finished raising his role-play weapon.
Seconds.
The second one came through the interior door at a run, and she stepped out of the doorway, not into it, so the charge went past her instead of into her, then corrected behind him. Casualty was in the fourth room, behind a locked door. She didn't look for a key. She checked the hinge's exterior, the amateur mistake of whoever had built the mock-up and applied pressure at the correct load point until the door gave. Retrieved the casualty dummy, dragged it to the extraction point. 94 seconds. 4 seconds slower than Mercer. Clear, she called. Ward wrote something longer this time. She's slower than Mercer, Brick said that evening, over the food trays in the mess. By 4 seconds, Reyes said. 4 seconds is a lot. 4 seconds is 4 seconds. Reyes scraped the last of his rice to one side. You see how she took the door? What about it? Hinges were wrong side. She caught it in. He paused, thinking. 5-6 seconds of assessment time, and went straight to the solution. Mercer spent 20 seconds on the lock. Brick looked at him. So she's slower on the clock and faster in her head. Reyes shrugged. Interesting. Brick looked across the mess toward the table where Lena was sitting alone with her notebook and a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold. You think she's sandbagging? I think I don't know yet. Reyes picked up his tray. The first time I've said that about anyone in this building. On day 6, Cole Mercer started the rumor. He didn't mean it as a rumor exactly. It started as a comment, the kind that gets made in the locker area after evening formation when people are tired and their guard is down. You know what her last post was? He said to Hollander, without lowering his voice. Logistics, right? Supply depot in Camp Keller. Inventory management. He pulled off his boots. She filed supply requisitions for 14 months. That's her whole recent record. Recent. Yeah. Mercer looked over his shoulder toward the barracks door. Before that, there's a gap. Like a year and a half, where there's basically nothing. Just administrative assignment. Categories sealed. Brick frowned. Sealed how? Sealed how I can't access it, which means someone above my clearance level sealed it. He set his boot down. But who seals a logistics Marine's record? Maybe she requested the privacy seal herself. Some people do for personal. Nobody requests a privacy seal on a year and a half of active duty service licks. Brick, that's not how it works. Mercer lay back on his bunk. Something's off with her. Brick glanced at Reyes, who was pretending to read. Reyes turned a page. She heard it, of course. Building C's had the acoustic insulation of a cardboard box, and she'd been lying in her bunk on the other side of a plywood partition with her eyes open. She didn't move, didn't say anything, didn't shift on the mattress. The sealed record wasn't something she'd asked for. It had been sealed above her by people whose names she wasn't supposed to know. The administrative assignment notation covered 18 months of her life that existed entirely outside to the standard Marine Corps record system. No unit designation, no after-action documentation, no fitness reports. Just a name she wasn't supposed to use and a phone number she'd been told to memorize and then forget. Forgotten it on purpose, eventually. Some things were easier to carry at distance. The photograph in her jacket pocket was from that time. The man with the coffee mug, the desert she couldn't name. She closed her eyes and focused on her breathing until the room went quiet. Day 7 started with a PT formation in the dark at 545. Ward ran them through a modified circuit pull-ups, sandbag carries, a half-mile sprint in full gear, and then announced, with the particular calm of a man who enjoys delivering uncomfortable news, that the afternoon evolution would be a full-contact combatives assessment. Not paired rotation, he said. Open challenge format. Any candidate can step into the pit. You stay in until you tap or I pull you. Mercer's eyes moved across the formation. Lena was 4 people down the line from him. She was looking straight ahead. Participation is voluntary, Ward said. But I'll be noting who steps in and who doesn't. Questions? No questions. Dismissed. Chow at 07. Formation at 1300. The afternoon light in Arizona in mid-October carried a particular quality, sharp and flat at the same time, casting hard shadows with no softness at the edges. The training pit looked different in it than it did in the morning. More honest, somehow. Brick Hollander went in first against Reyes. They went 3 minutes, a genuine, committed exchange that left both of them breathing hard and Brick, with a split lip, he didn't notice for 30 seconds after the buzzer. Good, Ward said, then next. Mercer stepped in. He fought 2 rounds against different candidates, winning both, and Ward let him stay in because nobody challenged him out. Then he looked at the line. Cross. It wasn't an order. His tone didn't make it an order. It was something slightly different, an invitation with teeth. Kind of invitation that let you say no, but made clear that no had a cost. Lena stepped into the pit. Around the perimeter, the watching Marines shifted. Not much, just a degree or two, the kind of subtle repositioning that happens when something has elevated from training exercise to something else. Mercer rolled his shoulders. He looked at her across the sand the same way he'd looked at her on day 4, except this time there was something behind it that hadn't been there before. The rumor he'd started, the sealed record, the questions it had raised, including the ones he hadn't said out loud. He was going to get an answer one way or another. Standard rules, Ward said. Contact controlled. Tap ends the round. The whistle blew. Mercer moved like he had on day 4, the same opener, the same confidence, the same deliberate speed that advertised competence. Expected her to absorb it the way she had before. Let it happen. Redirect, survive, reset. She moved differently. Not dramatically. Not with a visible shift in intention. Just differently. Timing was off by a fraction of a second, and in that fraction of a second, the collar tie that should have connected didn't, and the hip throw that should have followed had nothing to attach to. And Mercer found himself overextended with his weight forward and her shoulder already inside his arm. Corrected fast. He was good enough to correct fast. Correction cost him his stance, and without his stance, he was working at a disadvantage. And against someone who knew what to do with a disadvantage, the math changed. She didn't take him down. She could have. The opening was there, clearly, for about a full second, an eternity in close quarters. She passed it. Instead, she reset, stepped back, gave him the space to recover. Mercer blinked. Around the pit, nobody spoke. Ward's pen had stopped moving. Mercer came in again, this time lower, going for the takedown with everything, the full technical application of his body weight and strength and training, all of it committed to one movement. And she let him get there. And at the precise moment of commitment, when his weight was fully transferred and there was no mechanical way to abort, she redirected. Not hard, not flashy, just accurately. Cole Mercer hit the sand face first with a sound like a dropped sandbag, and by the time he processed what had happened, her knee was at his back, and one hand had his wrist at an angle that made his shoulder light up, like someone had plugged it into a wall socket. He tapped, fast, hard, 3 times. She released immediately and stepped back. The pit was completely silent. Mercer got up slowly. He worked his shoulder in a circle, testing it, looked at her. She was looking back at him with an expression that was not triumph, not apology, not anything easily readable. Just attention, like she was still watching, still assessing. Again, he said. Ward started to speak. Again, Mercer repeated. And this time there was something raw in it. Not anger exactly, something closer to need. Ward looked at Lena. Your call. She nodded once. The whistle blew again. This time, Mercer fought differently. No performance, no advertising. Just the real thing, everything he had, applied with precision and controlled fury. He was genuinely excellent. Ward had been right about that from day one, and nothing that was happening now contradicted it. But she was something else. She moved through his offense the way water moves through obstacles, not resisting the structure, just resisting the structure, finding the spaces between it. Every adjustment he made, she was already past it. Every sequence he initiated, she was reading before it finished. 2 minutes in, she had controlled him 6 times without committing to a finish, and the watching Marines had stopped breathing normally. At 2 minutes, 43 seconds, she finished it. A single clean throw, the kind that requires perfect timing, perfect positioning, and an opponent who has been set up for it without realizing it over the course of 2 minutes and 42 seconds of what they thought was unsuccessful offense. Mercer hit the sand for the second time. He lay there for a moment longer than the first time. When he got up, he didn't say anything. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and whatever question he'd been trying to answer in the pit, he had his answer. It just wasn't the answer he'd expected. Around the pit, 43 Marines stood in complete silence. Ward hadn't written anything in the last 4 minutes. His pen was in his hand, cap on, clipboard at his side. He looked at Lena Cross. Where, he said slowly, did you learn that? She met his eyes and said nothing. From the edge of the formation, barely audible in the flat Arizona afternoon, someone's radio crackled. A voice, calm and official, read out a frequency identification code, the kind used for priority communications from outside the installation. Ward's head turned sharply. The voice on the radio said 3 words before the channel went to static. Clearance, Iron Ridge. Incoming. The radio crackled once more and then went completely dead. Ward didn't move for a full 3 seconds. That was unusual. In 11 years of running Iron Ridge, Major Ethan Ward moved constantly clipboard to hand to pocket, eyes across the formation, always cycling, always processing. 3 full seconds of stillness from him meant something had landed that he hadn't expected. He turned to the comms sergeant standing near the equipment shed. Vasquez, get me a line to the command post, now. Vasquez was already moving. Ward looked back at the pit. Lena was standing exactly where she'd been when she finished the second round, with Mercer feet at shoulder width, hands at her sides, expression unreadable. She hadn't moved either. She was looking at him the way someone looks at a situation they've been anticipating for a while without knowing exactly when it would arrive. Mercer was on his feet, brushing sand from his sleeves, his eyes moving between Ward and Lena with the focused attention of a man who'd spent the last 4 minutes revising everything he thought he understood about the woman standing across from him. Formation hold, Ward said to the group. Not loud. Just final. Then he walked to the equipment shed and disappeared inside. Nobody spoke. Brick Hollander looked at Reyes. Reyes was watching Lena. She'd picked up her water bottle from the rail and was drinking from it with the unhurried patience of someone waiting for a bus she knew was coming. "You know what that frequency code was?" Brick said low. "No," Frey said. "You recognize the prefix?" Reyes was quiet for a moment. Priority traffic from outside the installation." He paused. "Above base command level." Brick absorbed that. "That's not a scheduling call." "No," Reyes agreed. "It's not." Lena set her water bottle back on the rail and looked at nothing in particular. Ward was inside the equipment shed for 11 minutes. When he came back out, his face had the controlled neutrality of a man who'd received information he was still deciding how to carry. He walked straight to the center of the formation without looking at Lena, which was itself a kind of looking. "Evolution's done for the day," he said. "PT in the morning at 05:30. Dismissed. No additional comment. No explanation." Ward never explained himself to candidates, but he usually explained the schedule. The group broke apart slowly, the way groups do when they know something happened and nobody's saying what. Conversation started in low voices. Mercer fell in alongside Crane, and the two of them walked toward Building C with their heads close together. Lena walked back alone. She was almost to the door when Ward's voice came from behind her, not loud, not sharp, just placed precisely enough that it reached her and nobody else. "Cross." A word. She stopped. Turned around. Ward walked to her at a measured pace, hands behind his back, and stopped at a distance that was professional, but close enough to be private. He looked at her for a moment the way he'd looked at her in the pit, as if he was updating a mental file in real time, and hadn't finished yet. "Call I just took," he said. "Command wants me to verify your assignment protocols." "Okay, that's a routine administrative check. I know. Happens occasionally when a candidate's paperwork has gaps." He said the last word carefully. Not as an accusation. As a door he was opening to see if she'd walk through it. She didn't. "Is there something I should know?" he said. "About the administrative check? About you." The question sat in the air between them. A dust devil spun up from the sand about 20 yards to their left and dissolved just as fast. "I'm a Marine, sir," she said. "I'm here to complete the CIDT. Everything you need to know about me for that purpose is in my file." Ward held her gaze for another 2 seconds. "Everything I need to know," he repeated. And there was something dry in it, not quite amusement, not quite frustration. Tone of a man who suspects he's been given a technically accurate answer to a question he didn't quite ask. "Dismissed," he said. She walked inside. The next 72 hours at Iron Ridge ran on 2 tracks simultaneously. The official track looked normal. Formations, evolutions, scenario training, after-action reviews. Ward pushed the group harder than week 1, which everyone had expected, and most had mentally prepared for. Classroom sessions expanded to include operational planning exercises, which required each candidate to take a scenario, build a mission brief, and defend it under questioning from Ward and 2 other instructors who were specifically tasked with finding the weakness in every plan. The unofficial track was quieter and considerably more uncomfortable. Word had moved through the candidate group the way word always moves through small closed populations, fast, sideways, and already modified by the time it reached the people it was about. By the morning after the pit, everyone in Building C knew 2 things. Lena Cross had put Cole Mercer on the ground twice in 4 minutes, and a priority communication from outside base command had arrived on a restricted channel within an hour of it happening. Whether those 2 facts were connected was a question nobody was asking out loud, but everyone was thinking about silently. Mercer was thinking about it louder than most. He ran the morning PT evolution at the front of the pack, which he always did, and finished the circuit in the top 3, which he also always did, and then sat through the breakfast period without saying more than 6 words to anyone, which was unusual enough that Brick noticed and didn't comment, which was itself a form of comment. After the morning classroom session operational planning, 2 hours, Ward picking apart everyone's mission briefs with the surgical patience of someone who'd seen every mistake before, and wasn't surprised by any of them. Mercer caught up to Lena in the corridor outside the training room. "Hey," she stopped, turned. He stood in front of her with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who'd been rehearsing something and had now decided to say it differently. "That move," he said, at the end of the second round. "The throw. What about it? I've seen that once before." He paused. "Not in the Corps. Not in any stateside facility. I saw it at a joint training exercise with MARSIC guys 3 years ago. One of their senior guys showed it to me as a theoretical." He looked at her directly. He said it was from a classified CQB program. Said he'd seen it used twice in the field, and both times it ended a fight completely. Lena said nothing. "You know what he called the program?" "No. He didn't give me a name. Just a letter designation." Mercer's voice was level. Not aggressive. Something past aggressive. Something careful, like someone approaching a subject that he'd decided required care. "I'm not going to ask you what your sealed record says. I don't have the clearance, and honestly, I don't think that's my business." She waited. "But I need to know," he said, and for the first time, something genuinely human showed up under the controlled surface of him. Something that might have been, at its root, embarrassed, whether you were going easy on me. On day 4, the corridor was empty except for them. Outside, someone ran a set of pull-ups on the rack. By the building entrance, the rhythmic creak of metal under weight. "Yes," she said. He nodded slowly. Not wounded by it, or not only wounded. Something else was happening in his face. A recalculation. "Okay," he said. "You're good, Mercer," she said, and she meant it the same way. She said most things directly, without decoration. "You're genuinely good. That's not a consolation. But you fight like someone's watching, even when the only thing that matters is the fight." He was quiet for a moment. The pull-up rack outside kept creaking. "That's a problem," he said finally. "Not a question. In a real situation, yeah." She shifted her weight. "Here, maybe not. Ward likes to see performance. Performance is what the program grades. But you don't fight for performance. No." Mercer looked at her for another long moment, the way he'd looked at her in the pit after the second, the look of someone who'd been handed an answer that unlocked a follow-up question he wasn't sure he was ready to ask. "Who taught you?" he said, and she looked at him with the expression of someone for whom that question had a very long answer and a very clear limit on how much of it could be given in a corridor in Building C on a Wednesday morning. "Go get lunch," she said, not unkindly. She walked away. He stood where she'd left him for a moment, then went the other direction. Operational planning session that afternoon put Lena in a team of 3 with Crane and a candidate named Sergeant Adeze Obi, a former military police investigator, with close-cropped hair and the precise economical movement of someone who'd spent years working in confined spaces where being large or careless was equally dangerous. Obi had been quiet through the first week of the program, not from timidity, but from the practiced professional stillness of someone who collected information before spending it. She and Lena had exchanged maybe 30 words total since intake. They worked well together immediately, which neither of them commented on. The scenario Ward had given them was a personal recovery op in a compromised urban environment, a 4-man team, partial comms, 1 casualty, and an unknown number of hostile personnel in 3 connected structures. The objective was to extract the casualty without alerting additional forces in the surrounding block. Ward gave them 40 minutes to build the brief. Crane took the structural assessment. Obi worked the comms and personnel count. Lena built the movement sequence and the contingency tree, the what happens if chart, that every real op needed, and most training exercises treated as optional. "You're putting a secondary extract in the south wall," Crane said. looking at her diagram. Primary route gets compromised. That adds 3 minutes to the timeline. It also means we don't leave the casualty if the north corridor shuts down. She kept marking the diagram, which it will if we're running the north approach and they have any kind of early warnings set up. Crane leaned over the map. How are they alerting? Scenario doesn't specify. Doesn't have to. She tapped the diagram at the main entrance point. Building configuration puts the stairwell here. If someone's running basic perimeter discipline, they've got eyes on the stairwell from the second floor. We go in the north, they see us in 4 seconds. South gives us the rear approach, adds time up front, saves time on exit. Obi looked up from her comms chart. She's right. I know she's right, Crane said. I'm just noting that Ward is going to ask about the timeline discrepancy. Then we tell him the 3 minutes is worth it, Lena said. He'll push back. Good, she finished the diagram. Then we defend it. They presented the brief at the end of the session. Ward sat across the table with his 2 instructors and methodically took apart every decision in the plan, the way he'd taken apart every other team's plan, not with hostility, but with the accumulated skepticism of someone who'd watched plans fail in real environments and had zero patience for assumptions that had been stress-tested. He got to the secondary extraction route. 3-minute timeline impact. Justify. Primary route has a 4-second exposure window at the stairwell, Lena said. If the hostiles are running basic perimeter discipline and the scenario gives us no information that they aren't, we're compromised before we reach the casualty. Scenario may not include perimeter discipline. If it doesn't, we lose 3 minutes and complete the primary successfully. If it does and we don't have a secondary, we lose the casualty and possibly the team. She held his gaze. 3 minutes is a guaranteed cost against a potentially fatal outcome. That's a favorable trade. Ward's pen moved, and if the south approach has its own exposure problem you haven't identified, contingency tree accounts for that. If the south gets compromised, we abort and regroup at the rally point on the eastern block. We don't push into a compromised approach. You abort the mission. We preserve the team and replan. A mission you can attempt again is better than a completed failure. The room was quiet. The other instructor on Ward's left, a compact, weathered lieutenant colonel named Graves, who hadn't said anything in either of the previous 2 briefs, looked up from his notes. Who's the team lead on this plan? He said. Crane said, we built it together. Graves looked at Lena. Who designed the contingency tree? I did, she said. Graves wrote something on his notepad and went back to it without another word. Ward said, acceptable, which in his vocabulary was roughly equivalent to anyone else saying excellent, and moved to the next team's brief. Night was different. Not dramatically. Not in a way that announced itself. But Lena felt the change in the room when she walked back to Building C after the evening review session. A shift in atmospheric pressure, subtle and directional. The way weather changes before the weather changes. Common area had 4 people in it. Brick was writing letters, home actual paper letters, which Lena found quietly remarkable about him. Reyes was reviewing a tactical manual he'd read at least twice already. 2 other candidates were running through combative sequences on the floor mat. Nobody looked up when she walked in. But the quality of nobody looking up was different. It wasn't indifference. It was the careful studied neutrality of people who had recently been discussing something and had decided in the last 30 seconds to stop. She got a glass of water, sat on the end of the bench near the door, and drank it slowly. Graves asked about your contingency tree, Obi said from the table, without looking up from her own paperwork. I know. He doesn't ask about specific elements of plans unless he's building a file. Obi looked up then. She had direct eyes, the kind that assessed without performing the assessment. You've been through a formal review process before. It wasn't a question. Lena set her glass down. What makes you think that? The way you sat when Ward was picking apart the brief. Most people shift. Get defensive. You went very still. Obi tapped her pen against the notepad. That's what you do when you've been trained to stay stable under evaluation. When going still is a practiced response. Lena looked at her for a moment. You were an investigator. 6 years. It shows. I know. Obi went back to her paperwork, which was its own kind of punctuation. She'd made the observation. She wasn't demanding a response. The observation stood on its own. Brick looked up from his letter. Graves is Iron Ridge's oversight liaison, he said. To the room generally, to nobody specifically. He's not a standard instructor. He's the one who signs off on candidate suitability reviews. If a candidate gets flagged for any reason it goes through him, nobody responded to that for a moment. Flagged, Lena said. Performance concerns. Background questions. Anything that makes the program wonder whether a candidate should be here. Brick looked at his letter as if he was still working on it. Not saying that's what this is, but you're saying it might be. He didn't answer, which was an answer. Lena stood up. Good night, she said, and went to her bunk. The knock on Lieutenant Colonel Graves' door at Iron Ridge came the next morning at 7:15, 15 minutes before the candidate formation, while most of the training facility was still in the operational gap between waking up and starting the day. Graves opened the door in his utility uniform, coffee mug in hand, and looked at her with the expression of a man who was not surprised. Candidate Cross, he said. Sir. She stood at parade rest. I'd like to know if there's an ongoing review of my assignment. He considered her for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he stepped back and gestured to the 2 chairs in front of his desk. She sat. He sat. He put his coffee mug down on a legal pad and looked at her. Who told you? He said. Nobody. But Hollander mentioned your role, and you wrote something after asking about the contingency tree, and Ward hasn't given me a direct word evaluation since the pit evolution yesterday. Graves looked at her steadily. You're cataloging behavioral patterns. Occupational habit. From what occupation? She didn't answer that. He nodded slightly, as if she'd confirmed something. There's a background verification in process, he said. Standard protocol when a candidate presents with administrative record gaps. The gap is classified. I'm aware. The verification isn't asking about the content. It's asking about the authorization level and the sponsoring office. He leaned back in his chair. Depending on what that returns, you may continue in the program unchanged. You may be asked to provide documentation I suspect you don't have and can't request. Or you may receive communication from outside this installation that supersedes the verification entirely. Which do you think will happen? I think you already know which will happen, Graves said. Which is why you're sitting in this chair, telling me you're aware of the process rather than pretending you're not. The morning light through the single window in Graves' office was the same flat Arizona quality, no warmth in it, just brightness. Somewhere outside, the first formation was starting to assemble. She could hear boots on gravel. I completed the CIDT application through proper channels, she said. My orders are valid. My assignment is authorized. I'm not disputing any of that. Then what's the concern? Graves picked up his coffee mug, looked at it, and set it back down. The concern, Candidate Cross, is that you are not what your file describes. Everybody in this facility knows that now. The question is what you actually are, and whether this program is the appropriate context for it. He looked at her directly. Because if the answer to that question comes back at the level I suspect it might, then this program isn't a step up for you. It's a significant step down, and we'd need to understand why someone with that background is voluntary citizen in an evaluation course that should be well below her demonstrated capability. The words landed in the quiet room and sat there. Lena looked at him without shifting. Question had a real answer. The answer had a reason behind it, a specific human reason that had nothing to do with operational factors or classification levels or program structure. It was the kind of reason that didn't belong in a professional conversation in a utility-grade office at 7:15 on a Thursday morning. I want to teach, she said. You said that to Ward on day 1. That's the whole answer? She met his eyes. For right now, yes. Graves held her gaze for another 3 minutes, then nodded once, not agreement. Not satisfaction, just acknowledgement that she'd given him what she was going to give him. Formation in 12 minutes, he said. Yes, sir. She stood. Thank you for being straight with me. I'm always straight, Graves said. It's faster. She left his office and walked back across the gravel toward Building C. The formation assembling in the distance, 12 figures in the early light, some of them checking their gear, some of them still coming out of the building entrance. Mercer was already there. He saw her coming from across the field. He didn't say anything, just gave her a small nod, the kind that communicates several things at once without specifying any of them, and went back to checking his bootlaces. She fell into position at the end of the line. Ward arrived at exactly 730. He walked the line without looking at anyone specifically, which meant he was looking at everyone simultaneously, the trained observer's trick of using peripheral attention more than direct. Stopped at the center. Changed to today's schedule, he said. Afternoon evolution is moving up. We start at 0900. Full kit. Combat scenario live OP4. Murmurs ran through the line. Not protest surprise. Live OP for scenarios in week 2 were early. Significantly early. The scenario parameters are classified at facility level, Ward continued. You'll receive your individual briefs at 0845. Questions. Crane raised his hand. Sir, are we running in teams or individual? Teams. Assignment by my discretion. Ward's eyes moved down the line and stopped on Lena. Not for long. Just pairings. Will be posted in 15 minutes. That's all. He walked away. Lena stood very still in the formation, looking at the horizon where the Arizona flats met the pale sky. Something had changed in the schedule, something outside the standard program rhythm. And the direction of Ward's look when he'd said teams told her, without a word, exactly who she'd be working with and why. Whatever the background verification had returned, overnight it had returned fast. And someone had made a decision based on it. She just didn't know yet whether that decision was good for her or not. Behind her, quietly enough that only she could hear it, Rhea said, "Told you he'd clock you eventually." She didn't turn around. "Yeah," she said. "I know." The pairings went up on the board at 743, and she stood in front of them with her collocaphene going cold in her hand, reading the list twice to make sure she'd read it right. Her name was there. The scenario designation next to it was not a standard CIDT evolution code. It was a code she recognized from a different context entirely, a context she'd spent 18 months in and had never expected to encounter again inside a stateside training facility. Coffee had gone completely cold by the time she lowered the mug. Crane appeared at her shoulder, looked at the board, and said nothing for a moment. Then that designation. "You know what that means?" "Yes," she said. "You going to tell me?" She looked at the board one more time. The code sat there in Ford Ward's precise block handwriting, unremarkable to anyone who hadn't seen it before, everything to anyone who had. "No," she said. "But you'll see it when we get there." Code on the board was VIP or R7. Crane didn't know what it meant. Neither did OB, who had drifted over and was reading the pairings list, with the focused quiet of someone cross-referencing it against something in her memory. Neither did Mercer, who came up last, scanned the board in 3 seconds, and then looked at Lena with his arms crossed and his jaw set in the particular way of a man who didn't like information gaps. "VIP 7, he said. "Scenario designation," Lena said. "Obviously. What kind of scenario?" She picked up her coffee, remembered it was cold, and set it back down. "The kind that isn't in the standard CIDT curriculum." "That's not an answer." "I know." Mercer looked at the board again, then at her. "You've run this before. I've seen the designation before." "That's not the same as—" "No," she said. "It's not." He stared at her for one more second, then walked away toward the equipment room. His boots were loud on the gravel, and then they weren't, and the board, with its 11 pairings and one anomalous designation, was the only thing left to look at. Crane said quietly, "Should we be concerned?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's not reassuring. I know that too." The briefing at 845 was not held in the standard classroom. Ward led them to a separate building on the eastern edge of the Iron Ridge compound, a low concrete structure that Lena had noticed on day one and cataloged as probably administrative overflow. Up close, it had a keypad entry and no windows on the ground floor, which ruled out administrative overflow immediately. Inside was a single long room with a table, 12 chairs, and a projection screen. The chairs were already filled by the time the PsyDT candidates filed, and not by other candidates, but by men and women Lena didn't recognize. 8 of them. Mixed uniforms, some standard marine utility. 2 in what appeared to be modified tactical gear, without visible unit insignia. 1 in civilian clothes with a government ID lanyard that he'd turned backward so the card faced his chest. Ward stood at the front. "Sit," he said. They sat. "Today's evolution is a joint assessment," Ward said. "You will be participating in a simulated crisis scenario alongside personnel from an outside evaluation team. The scenario is classified at facility level. What happens in this room and in the training environment today does not get discussed outside of it. Any questions about that?" Silence. "The scenario parameters." Ward clicked the projector. A building schematic appeared on the screen, 4 structures in a rough compound layout, connected by covered walkways with entry and exit points marked in red. Simulated hostage situation. Unknown number of hostile personnel. 1 high-value individual in the central structure. Your objective as a team is assessment and tactical recommendation. You are not running the extraction. The outside team handles execution. Your job is to observe the environment, identify threat vectors, and communicate actionable intelligence to the extraction lead within a 60-minute window. One of the men at the table, the one in civilian clothes, looked up. He was maybe 55, with the kind of face that had been weathered by more than just weather, and eyes that took in the room the way radar takes in airspace, automatically, completely, without apparent effort. "Questions about the scenario," Ward said. Crane raised his hand. "Who's the extraction lead?" "That would be me," the civilian said. His voice was flat Midwest, completely unaccented, the vocal equivalent of a blank wall. He didn't offer a name. Nobody asked for one. "Questions about the rules of engagement," Ward said. No hands. "Then we move in 15. Get your kit." Training compound on Iron Ridge's eastern range was not the mock-up cluster of plywood structures Lena had worked in on day 5. This was something different, a permanent facility. Concrete and rebar, 2 stories on the main building, functional doors and staircases, and actual interior space. Kind of facility that got used for specific things and not the general training rotation. She'd clocked it on her second day at the base, running the perimeter road. She'd noted the camera positions and the locked vehicle gate and the lack of maintenance traffic, which meant it wasn't used often. She'd filed it away without knowing when it would matter. It was mattering now. The 12 CIDT candidates split into 3 observer teams. Ward assigned the configurations without explanation: Crane, Obi, and 2 other candidates on the north approach. Brick and Reyes on the west. Mercer's and 3 others on the south. Lena's name wasn't on any of the team assignments. Ward handed her a separate card. She read it, read it again, kept her face arranged. The card said, "Assessment Lead. Coordinate all 3 observer teams. Report direct to extraction lead. 60-minute window begins on your mark." She looked up. Ward was watching her with the expression of a man who had not made this decision himself, but had agreed to implement it. "Sir," she said, low enough that the others nearby couldn't hear it clearly. "This is an assessment lead role. That's an instructor-level function." "I'm aware. I'm a candidate. I'm also aware." He held her gaze. The outside team requested the configuration. I didn't argue with it. He paused. Can decline. She looked at the card again. The 60-minute window. 3 observer teams. 1 extraction lead who'd turned his ID backward. No, she said. I'll run it. Then mark your start time and get moving. She gave herself 45 seconds before she marked the start. Not from hesitation, from the habit of using the first 45 seconds of any operation to stand still and think, rather than moving and burning time on assumptions. She'd been taught that by the man in the photograph, the first thing you do is nothing. The second thing you do is everything. She looked at the compound from the assembly point. Building layout matched the schematic. Entry points, as marked, which meant the scenario designers hadn't tried to be clever about that particular element. Covered walkways between structures were not on the schematic. They'd been added after the diagram was made, or the diagram was deliberately incomplete. She marked the walkway positions mentally. Threat vector she hadn't been given. Advantage or problem, depending on where the OPFR was positioned. Clicked her radio. Cross to all teams. Confirm comms. 3 clicks back from the north. 2 from the west. Brick's voice came through a half-second later, low and clear. 1 click from the south. Then Mercer's voice. South team up. Start time marked. North team, take the perimeter road and give me a visual on all second-floor windows before you approach. West team, I need entry point confirmation on the covered walkways. Those aren't on your schematic. South team, hold position until I have north and west assessment. Do not approach the main structure until I say. Mercer's voice came back immediately. We can see the main entrance from here. There's movement inside. How many? 2 visible. Could be more. What floor? Ground. Near the main entrance. Through the window. Do they know you're there? A pause. Negative. We're behind the vehicle barrier. Stay there. Don't give me a position until I ask for it. She moved, not toward the main structure east, along the fence line to get a sight line on the east face of the compound that none of the 3 teams had covered. Schematic had marked east as a secondary approach. Secondary approaches on schematics were either accurate or deliberately wrong, and the only way to know which was to look. East face, 1 door, padlocked from outside. 2 windows, ground floor, both shuttered. No movement visible, no camera on the east wall, which was a gap that either meant the east face was clear or meant someone had specifically left it clear. She kept moving. The north corner of the main building gave her a diagonal view of the central courtyard, the space between the main structure and the secondary building where the HVI was supposedly held. Courtyard had 2 people in it who weren't on anyone's schematic. They were positioned against the wall in the shadow of the covered walkway, both facing outward, both wearing the gray armbands of scenario OPFOR. Neither of them was moving. Static security. The kind of position you put people in when you want covered on the approaches to a specific room. She marked their positions. The room were facing the one the central structure's covered walkway fed into was not labeled on the schematic. The HVI wasn't in the central structure. The HVI was in the unlabeled room. Clicked her radio. Cross to north team. What's your window assessment? Crane's voice. 3 windows visible. Second floor. 1 has partial obstruction, something draped on the inside. The other 2 are clear. No visible personnel at either. Is the obstruction fabric or solid material? A pause. Fabric. Looks like a jacket, maybe. That's a marker. Someone put it there intentionally. She was already thinking through the implication. A marker on the second floor. 2 static OPFOR in the courtyard watching the covered walkway. HVI probably in the unlabeled room. And 2 hostiles visible on the ground floor near the main entrance. Cross to west team. Walkway status. Brick 3 covered walkways. 2 of them connect to the main structure. Third one goes to a separate building on the northwest corner, wasn't on the schematic. Door at the far end looks operational. Is the northwest building on the perimeter road? No. It's interior to the compound. You'd have to go through one of the main structures to reach it from outside. or through the east face, the padlocked door on the east face that faced away from all three teams. Put it together. 3 seconds. The solution had the quality of things that are obvious in retrospect. All the pieces had been available. They just needed to be standing in the right place to see how they connected. Clicked her radio. Cross to extraction lead. The civilian's voice came back, clean and immediate. Go. HVI is not in the central structure. HVI is in the northwest building, accessible through the covered walkway from the main structure's interior. You have 2 static OPF-OR in the central courtyard covering that walkway. You have 2 mobile OPF-OR near the main entrance, ground floor. Unknown personnel on the second floor 1 room has a marker that suggests either a signal or a delay element. She paused. East face of the compound has a padlocked door that's unmonitored. If you breach east, you can access the main structure from a blind angle and reach the northwest building through the interior without going through the courtyard. A longer pause than she expected. Then, you're telling me the schematic is wrong. Schematic is incomplete. Deliberately. Another pause. Timeline? If you move now, before the mobile OP4, does a rotation check 8 minutes. Maybe 10. Position of the static OP4 in the courtyard. North wall of the covered walkway, both of them. Shadow position, facing south. East approach keeps you out of their sightline until you're inside the main structure. The civilian's pause this time was different in quality, not processing. But something that sounded almost like assessment. Of her. Hold, he said. She held. On the south side of the compound, Mercer's voice came over the radio, quieter than before. Cross, the 2 OP4 at the main entrance are moving. They're doing a walk-through rotation. They'll be at the east face in approximately 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Not 8. Not 10. Cross to extraction lead. Timeline revised. East face clears in 4 minutes when mobile OPF4 rotation reaches it. Window closes at minute 5. The civilian said, "Can you hold the east approach open?" She looked at the fence line, at the padlocked door, at the timing. Not without being visible to the static OPF-OR in the courtyard. That's a problem. I can redirect the static OPF-OR. Silence on the line for 2 full seconds. How, the civilian said. I need Mercer's south team to create a sound event on the south wall. Enough noise to pull at least one of the courtyard positions toward the south perimeter for a visual check. 30-second window while they're repositioned. Another second. That's a gamble. Everything past this point is a gamble. The difference is, this one has a 30-second window with a defined outcome versus a 4-minute window that closes completely. She heard the civilian exhale, a quiet sound, almost inaudible through the radio. The sound of someone making a decision they'd already made and were just finalizing. Do it, he said. She clicked over to Mercer's channel. South team. I need a sound event on the south wall. Something that sounds like contact boots, gear, impact. Do it in 60 seconds. Sustain for 15. Then go completely silent and hold. Mercer's voice came back without hesitation. Copy. 60 seconds. She looked at her watch. Marked the time. Moved to the east fence line. The padlock on the east door was a standard keyed model, the kind that looked substantial and wasn't. She'd noted the type when she first looked at the door. Keyed padlock in an interior training facility was a prop, not a security measure. The shackle had the wear pattern of something that had been opened and closed hundreds of times. She found a piece of angle iron on the ground near the fence equipment staging debris, the kind that accumulated around any regularly used training facility, and tested the fit on the shackle. It wasn't a key. It would work anyway. Her watch hit 60 seconds. From the south side of the compound, the sound event started. Boots on concrete, something metallic hitting a wall, the kind of chaotic acoustic signature that in a real environment would mean at least 2 people moving aggressively along a perimeter. It was convincing. Mercer's team had done it convincingly. She watched the courtyard through the gap in the fence. One of the static OP4 moved immediately, the one on the left, who was slightly closer to the south-facing direction. He repositioned toward the courtyard's south wall, peering through the gap between buildings. The second one held his position for 4 seconds. 3-2. Then his radio must have said something, because he turned his head, looked at his partner, and moved 2 steps south to get a visual angle. She had the padlock off the shackle before he'd finished moving. East door open, inside the main structure in 4 steps, into the interior corridor that connected east to west. The walkway to the northwest building was at the end of the corridor. She could see it from where she stood. She clicked her radio. East access is open. Corridor is clear. Extraction lead. You have a clean approach for approximately 90 seconds before the static OP4 resets. The civilian's voice. Moving. She pressed herself against the interior wall of the corridor and watched the approach. From her position, she had sight lines on both the east door, which she'd left functionally open, and the covered walkway. The northwest building's door at the walkway's end was closed but not locked. She could see the gap at the bottom of it. The extraction team came through the east door 40 seconds later. 5 people moving in a tight file, quiet in a way that wasn't trained quiet, but operational quiet, the kind that came from doing this in conditions that weren't training. Civilian in civilian clothes was third in the file. He looked at her as he passed her position, didn't stop, didn't speak, but looked at her the way someone looks at an answer to a question they've been holding for a while. The extraction team went through the walkway door. 50 seconds later, the radio crackled. HVI secure. Northwest structure. Scenario complete. From outside, she heard the OPEF4 facilitators calling the evolution closed. The static OP4 in the courtyard relaxed their positions. Mercer's south team stopped the sound event, which had been sustaining on rotation. She could hear from the rhythm that they'd figured out how to keep it going on a cycle without burning out. She walked back through the east corridor into the outside light. Ward was standing at the east face of the building. He'd been watching. From somewhere she hadn't tracked, which was unusual because she tracked positions as automatic function. He'd found a position she hadn't accounted for. He was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen from him before. Not the controlled assessment he'd worn since day one. Not the professional skepticism of a program director evaluating a candidate. Something different. The expression of a man who'd expected to see something good and had seen something else instead. Schematic was incomplete by design, he said. I know. Most teams don't catch it. Because most teams trust the schematic. He nodded slowly. The east approach wasn't in the scenario parameters. I know. You identified it on your own and built the approach from available materials without taking it through the extraction lead first. I cleared it with him before I executed, she said. You cleared the redirect of the OPF4 with him. You didn't clear your personal approach to the east access point. She didn't argue it. He was right. She'd made a decision and executed it because the timeline demanded it. And she'd known while she was doing it that it would look exactly like what it was an experienced field operator making a judgment call without waiting for authorization, because waiting would have cost the window. No, sir, she said. I didn't. He looked at her for a long moment. That's going to be a problem for some people. I know. Not necessarily for me. He paused. But for some people. She looked at the east door, still open, the angle iron she'd used lying on the ground where she'd set it down. Evidence of a solution she'd improvised in under 3 minutes. The scenario was designed for this, she said. It wasn't a question. Ward didn't confirm it. He also didn't deny it. He looked at the east door for a moment, then back at her. The outside team wants a debrief, he said. Command building. 1,500 hours. All candidates? No, Ward said. Just you. The debrief room in the command building was smaller than Graves' office and contained only 2 chairs, a table, and the civilian from the extraction team. Taken the lanyard off entirely. His government ID was in his jacket pocket. He was sitting with a cup of coffee in front of him, and nothing else. He waited until she sat. Then he said, "How long did it take you to identify the HVI's actual location?" "From start of assessment. From when you first looked at the compound." She thought about it, honestly. The walkway configuration was the first indicator. 40 seconds, maybe. Confirmation took longer. I needed Crane's window assessment and Brick's walkway status before I could triangulate. But you knew before you confirmed. I suspected before I confirmed. He nodded. He picked up his coffee likes and put it down without drinking from it. It was a thinking gesture, something to do with his hands, while his mind was somewhere else. "The schematic gap," he said. "The northwest building. That was a test element. It's been in this scenario for 6 runs. You're the first assessment lead to identify it without being told to look for it." She said nothing. The east approach was also a test element. It's been available in every run. Nobody has used it. He looked at her. Not because they couldn't see it, because the scenario parameters didn't sanction it, and most people, even good people, don't act on assets. The parameters didn't give them permission to see. The scenario was designed to have a correct solution that uses the east approach, she said. Yes, but the parameters were written to make candidates feel like the east approach was out of bounds. Yes, so it tests whether someone will follow the parameters or follow the problem. Yes. He looked at her. "Which one do you follow?" She met his eyes. "Depends on who wrote the parameters and why." He was quiet for a moment. Then something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile, but the infrastructure of one. The shape of it, without the expression. "That's the right answer," he said. "It's an honest answer. Not sure it's always the right one." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." He opened the jacket on the chair beside him and pulled out a slim folder. He set it on the table between them without opening it. The label on the front was a letter number designation she recognized. Not Vipier 7. Something older. Her hands were very still in her lap. "You recognize that designation," he said. "Yes. You were under it for 14 months. Teen." He corrected it without embarrassment. "Teen. I had the wrong end date." He put his hand on the folder but didn't open it. "I know what's in here. The condensed version. The version that was cleared for external review. I know that there are 4 months of it that are in a separate access tier that I can't read." She looked at the folder. "I'm not here to reopen that program," he said. "I'm not here to recruit you back into anything. I'm here because someone who knew your record flagged your CIDT application and asked us to take a look at why someone with your background was applying for a Marine Corps instructor development track." He paused. "So I'm asking you directly. Why?" The answer was in the breast pocket of her utility jacket, or rather, the thing the answer pointed to was folded and worn at the creases. But she didn't reach for it. The answer was hers. It didn't need evidence. "Program I was in," she said, "trained people to operate alone. To make isolated decisions in isolated environments. To be effective in conditions where there was no one beside them." She looked at him. "I was good at it. Better than good, I know. But the people who trained me, the one person specifically who mattered, his whole argument was that isolated capability doesn't compound. One person who's exceptional doesn't change a system. 10 people who are good change everything." She paused. "He's not in that program anymore. He's not anywhere anymore. And the thing he spent the most time trying to teach me, I never finished learning it." The civilian was very still across the table. "Teaching," she said. "He was trying to teach me how to teach, and I kept thinking I didn't need it yet. I kept thinking there was more field time to do first." She looked at the folder between them. There wasn't more time. The room was quiet for a long moment. "He was your program lead," the civilian said. Not a question, a confirmation. "Yes." He nodded slowly. He didn't offer condolences. She hadn't wanted them. This was a professional room, and this was a professional conversation, and condolences were for somewhere else. But she recognized the choice he'd made not to offer them, and she appreciated it the way you appreciate someone reading a room correctly. "The CIDT isn't the program he was describing," the civilian said. "I know. But it's a start. He looked at her for a long time. Then he closed the folder and picked up his coffee. And this time he actually drank from it. Going to be resistance, he said. Not from Ward. Ward's already decided what he thinks. But from the people who look at your background and sees a misallocation of assets. I know. They'll try to pull you back toward field operations. I know that too. And I'll deal with it when it happens. She met his eyes. Same way I deal with everything else. He set the coffee down, looked at her one more time, then stood up, which was the signal that the debrief was over. The scenario evaluation stands, he said. Assessment lead performance will go in your CIDT record as distinguished. He picked up the folder. It once, lightly, stays where it is. Thank you. He walked out. She sat alone in the debrief room for a moment, looking at the 2 coffee cups on the table, his half empty, hers untouched. Then she stood up, pushed in her chair, and walked out into the Arizona afternoon. The candidates were assembled at the vehicle staging area when she came back. Debrief usually followed evolution immediately, but Ward had held them in place without intensity, which meant everyone had been standing around for 45 minutes, knowing something was happening in the command building, and none of them knowing what. Mercer saw her coming from 20 yards out. He'd developed the habit watching out the approaches to wherever the group was positioned. She'd noticed it on day 3 and recognized it as someone who'd been in enough situations where knowing who was coming before they arrived had made a concrete difference. He said nothing, just tracked her approach, evaluated what her face was doing, and went back to looking at the middle distance. Crane fell in beside her as she reached the group. You good? Yeah, that was 45 minutes. I know. Ward didn't tell us anything. He wouldn't. Crane was quiet for a step. The scenario evaluation. You identified the northwest building without being told to look for it. The walkway configuration pointed to it. Nobody else read it that way. He kept his voice low. Obi didn't. Reyes didn't. I didn't. He glanced at her sideways. Where does that come from? She considered the honest answer versus the somewhere answer and landed somewhere between them. Pattern recognition, practice. Practice in what context? A different one. He accepted that. He'd learned in the last 2 days that she had a specific vocabulary for the edges of what she'd talk about, not evasive, just definite. The wall was real, and she wasn't pretending it wasn't there. The sound event, he said. Mercer held it for nearly 8 minutes on rotation. 3 people cycling through a noise pattern, sustaining it without repeating exactly. That's not improvised. No, she agreed. He's good. Yeah, he is. Ward arrived at the staging area at 1,620 and gave them the day's end briefing scenario results, individual observations, next day's schedule. He was precise and thorough and didn't single anyone's out by name, which was his standard. The evaluation of each candidate went into the written record, not the verbal one. At the end, he said, tomorrow morning, 05:30. Full kit again. We're running a night evolution starting at 2000 rest period from 1400 to 1800. No exceptions. He walked away. Night evolution. On Iron Ridge's calendar, that was week 4 material. They were in week 2. Obi walked alongside Lena toward Building C, and after a few seconds, she said, they're accelerating the schedule. Yeah, because of today. Probably. Because of you, Obi said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was the flat observation of someone who tracked causality as a professional habit. Whatever happened in that debrief room changed the timeline. Lena didn't deny it. Maybe. Definitely. Obi glanced at her. Are you going to tell us what it was? No. Obi nodded as if she'd expected exactly that. All right. She paused. For what it's worth, the sound event on the south wall. Mercer's held it longer than you asked. He didn't know why you needed it sustained, but he kept it going because he trusted you'd need the extra time. Lena looked at her. I'm just noting it, Obi said. People who didn't trust you 2 days ago are doing things on your call without knowing the reason. She let that sit for a moment. That's not nothing. She walked ahead, leaving Lena to finish the path to Building C alone. Above the training grounds, the Arizona sky had gone that particular flat orange. It went in the hour, before actual dark, not sunset, just the light running out of room. The security lights along the perimeter road clicked on, one by one, automated and indifferent. Mercer was sitting on the steps of Building C when she got there. He had his boots off, one in his hand, the other on the step beside him, and was checking the sulfur wear with the focused attention of someone who treated equipment maintenance as a form of thinking. He didn't look up when she approached. She sat on the step below him, and they were quiet for a moment. 8 minutes, she said. Figured you might need it. You couldn't have known that. No. He set the boot down. But you'd built a plan, and you needed the distraction sustained. And the only reason to sustain a distraction is because the window you're waiting for is still open. He shrugged. She looked out at the perimeter lights. One of them was flickering slightly, a ballast issue, or just old. It would be annoying in a real position observation. Thank you, she said. He picked up the second boot. Don't make it weird. She didn't. They sat there until the last of the flat orange went out of the sky, and the night settled over Iron Ridge. And somewhere in the darkness of the eastern range, someone was already setting up whatever tomorrow's evolution was going to require. And neither of them knew what it was yet. And somehow, that was the least uncertain part of the whole situation. The flickering perimeter light outside Building C finally gave out completely sometime before midnight. Lena knew because she'd been watching it through the narrow window above her bunk, not intentionally. Just the way the mind fixes on small, unstable things when it's working through something too large to approach directly. The light had cycled through irregular flickers for 2 hours, and then simply stopped, and the patch of ground it had been illuminating went dark. And that was that. She slept for 3 hours, maybe 3.5. When her internal clock pulled her back at 340, the room was quiet, except for Brick's breathing. He'd stopped actual snoring sometime in week 1, possibly because exhaustion had finally organized his sleep into something more efficient, and the distant sound of the security patrol making its north gate check. She lay still for a few minutes. Let her mind run through the previous day's timeline without directing it. The scenario, the debrief, the folder on the table with its designation she recognized. The civilian's face, when she'd said 18, not 14. The man in the photograph had been 47 when she met him, 53 when the program ended. She'd done the math on that several times, without meaning, too, the way you do with numbers attached to people who aren't there anymore. She got up at 410 and went to the training annex. She wasn't alone this time. Mercer was already there when she arrived, not running sequences, not working the dummy. Sitting on the mat against the far wall with his knees up and a small notebook open on his knee, writing something in the particular cramped shorthand of a person who thinks faster than they can record and has developed a compression system to compensate. He looked up when the door opened, took in that it was her, went back to the notebook. She stretched in the opposite corner, ran a slow joint rotation shoulders, hips, ankles, without making it a performance. After about 10 minutes, she started working the footwork patterns she'd been running every night, but slower, more deliberate. The way you practice something when you're not practicing it for speed, but for feeling of it, trying to understand the mechanics from the inside rather than execute them from memory. After a while, Mercer said, "You're changing something." She didn't stop moving. "What makes you think that?" "You're doing the same sequence you ran 2 nights ago. But you're pausing at the third transition point every time." He tilted his head slightly. "That's not a drill. That's troubleshooting." She stopped, looked at him. "You're paying attention," she said. "I pay attention to most things." He closed the notebook. "What's wrong with the third transition?" She thought about how to explain it. It's a timing issue. The transition works in a controlled environment. In an unpredictable one, an actual fight, there's a half beat where I'm committed to the direction and can adjust if the opponent doesn't do what I expect. Can you show me? She ran the sequence at half speed. Stopped at the transition. The half beat was visible when she isolated it, a moment of directional commitment that worked only if the opposing pressure came from the expected angle. Mercer stood up. Run it against me. I don't need a sparring partner. You need someone to not do what you expect. He moved to the center of the mat. Otherwise, you're just troubleshooting a problem in theory. She looked at him for a moment. He was right, which was slightly irritating. She moved to the mat. They worked for 40 minutes. Not combat, something more specific than that, more narrow. She ran the transition. He varied his response at the critical moment, and she worked through what happened to the sequence when the pressure came from wrong angles. Took 11 repetitions before she found the adjustment, a slight change in weight distribution at the second beat that gave her a half-second more to read the incoming response before committing to the third. It was a small thing. It took 40 minutes and 11 repetitions, because small things are hard. That's it, Mercer said after the 12th run. You had it that time. Maybe. She reset again. They ran it 4 more times. The adjustment held. She stepped back. Her shoulder was aching, the right one, the one that had hit the rail on day 4, which she'd been managing with specific mobility work every morning, and which was going to be a problem in the night evolution if she didn't give it another hour of treatment before then. You do this every night? Mercer said. Most nights. Alone. Usually. He picked up his notebook from the mat. Look at it, then at her. In the program, you were in the sealed one. Did they teach you this? The solo work habit? She didn't answer immediately. It wasn't a hostile question. She'd learned to distinguish Mercer's hostile questions from his genuinely curious ones, and this was the latter. But it touched the part of the answer she didn't have clean language for. He did, she said. Not the program. Him specifically. Mercer didn't ask who. He seemed to understand from her phrasing that it was a person rather than a curriculum, and that the person was past tense, and that he'd already gotten more of the answer than most people would. Good teacher, he said. Not a question. Yeah, she said. He was. She turned off the annex light, and they walked back to Building C in the dark, single file on the gravel path, not talking. Ward's night evolution briefing at 1830 covered the technical parameters without covering the thing everyone in the room actually wanted to know, which was why the schedule had moved 3 weeks forward. The evolution itself was a surveillance and interdiction scenario. 2 teams, night observation positions established within a defined perimeter, target identification under degraded conditions, and a controlled interdiction sequence to be executed within a 40-minute window before simulated extraction. Standard stuff at week 5. At week is a significant ask. Candidates had been running on the accelerated cycle since the VIP 7 scenario, and the exhaustion that had accumulated was the useful kind, the kind that stripped out performance behaviors and left only the real thing, because the real thing was all anyone had energy for. Ward posted team assignments. Lena read them, then read them again. She was not assessment lead this time. She was paired with Mercer on the East observation team, which was the longer approach, harder terrain, worse sight lines, and according to the schematic, which she now treated as a star pricing suggestion, rather than a fact, the team that would have to hold position for 30 minutes before the interdiction window opened. Crane and Obi had the west approach, shorter, better sight lines, first interdiction position. Reyes led a 5-person support element in the center. She looked at Ward, clipboard. He was looking at his clipboard, which meant he'd already looked at her while she was reading the board and had moved on. Questions about the scenario parameters, he said. Sir. Crane. Why east and west instead of the standard three-point configuration? Because the terrain on the north approach is under maintenance, and I'm not sending people through it in the dark, Ward said. Next. No next. Formation at 2000. That's all. By the time they were in position east approach, prone in the shallow depression behind the ridgeline that overlooked the scenario compound's north face, it was 2007, and the temperature had dropped 17 degrees from the afternoon high. Arizona nights in October were not politely cold. They were the aggressive cold of a place that spent all day accumulating heat and then spent all night getting rid of it with maximum efficiency. The ground was still warm 6 inches down and frigid at the surface, which created a specific physical misery. Bottom half of the body pulling warmth from the earth, top half losing it to the air. Mercer was 6 feet to her left, positioned behind a rock formation that gave him a sightline on the compound's east gate and the vehicle's staging area beyond it. He'd gone completely still when they settled into position. The stillness of someone who knew how to turn off the parts of themselves that move without purpose. She was watching the north face. 2 windows, ground floor, lights off. No movement visible. The compound looked exactly like the schematic said it would, which she was treating as suspicious. At 2103, her radio earpiece only, no speaker, clicked twice. Crane signal from the west, position established, target structure visible. She clicked back once. Copy. Then, nothing. 30 minutes of nothing, which was the plan, and which was the hardest part of any observation position for anyone who'd been trained in an environment that valued action over patience. She'd watched good operators compromise their own positions in the first 20 minutes because their nervous systems couldn't sustain the sustained inactivity. Mercer was not that kind of operator. He lay in the shallow depression without shifting weight, without adjusting his position, breathing at a rate that was slower than conversational. Clocked it without meaning to 5 breaths per minute, maybe 6. The rate of someone who'd learned to slow their system down as a deliberate act. 2119. Something moved in the compound, not at the north face. East Gate Mercer's position. A single figure crossing the vehicle staging area, moving without urgency, but also without any of the casual randomness of someone who didn't know where they were going. Mercer's hand came up 2 inches off the ground, 1 finger extended. 1 contact, East Gate, moving. She tracked the figure. Compact, medium build, moving with the purposeful economy of OPFOR personnel who were there to test something, rather than demonstrate something. The figure crossed the staging area, stopped at the gate, and looked south along the perimeter fence line. Then the figure looked north, directly at the ridge line, where she and Mercer were positioned. She went completely flat. Not a movement, an absence of movement. The distinction mattered because movement caught peripheral vision, and its absence didn't. Mercer had done the same thing. The figure at the gate held the north-facing position for seconds, counted them, then turned, walked back across the staging area, and disappeared into the compound's east structure. Mercer's hand came down. She exhaled. That was a check, he said barely above a breath. Perimeter audit, she agreed, same volume. They know somebody's out here. They suspect. They don't know where. She looked at her watch. 19 minutes to the interdiction window. We hold. They do another sweep before the window opens. We hold. He didn't argue. He went back to his sight line and his 5 breaths per minute and his complete stillness, and she went back to watching the north face. The interdiction window opened at 2137. At 2134, 3 minutes before it, Ward's voice came through the command channel. Not the team channel. The command channel was monitored by the exercise control element and was not used for field communication during evolutions except for administrative stop or continue calls. Cross. Command net. Respond. She clicked her earpiece to the command channel. Cross up. Stand by for relay. A pause of 4 seconds. Then a different voice, not Ward's, not Graves', not the civilian from the debrief room. A woman's voice, authoritative and measured, carrying the specific cadence of someone who was used to people listening when she spoke, not because she'd asked them to, but because the alternative was professionally inadvisable. Candidate Cross, this is Colonel Victoria Hale, Iron Ridge Commanding Officer. I need you off the Evolution and in the command building in 15 minutes. Lena's jaw tightened. 3 minutes to the interdiction window. Crane and Obi were in position on the west. The support element under Reyes was staged and ready. The whole scenario turned on the east and west observation teams, coordinating the target identification call within the first 5 minutes of the window. If east didn't call, Crane and Obi were working with half the picture. Colonel, she said, keeping her voice at breath level, the interdiction window opens in 3 minutes. I need 5 minutes inside the window to complete my team's observation role and transfer the position to 15 minutes, Candidate Cross. Command building. A pause. That means you leave now. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then, copy, ma'am. Leaving position. She touched Mercer's shoulder. He turned his head. She held up the command channel indicator on her radio. He understood the gesture, understood it was above the evolution level, and then pointed to herself, pointed toward the compound, and drew her finger across her throat. I'm out. East position goes to you. He looked at her for a moment. She could see the psychologically, professionally. She could see the question and not protest, just the natural information seeking of someone who needed to understand the new parameters to operate in them. She held up one finger. You handle East alone. He nodded. Turned back to his sight line. She was off the ridge line in 40 seconds, moving low and fast along the approach path, back toward the main compound. Behind her, at 2,137 exactly, she heard through her earpiece the double click that meant the interdiction window was open. Mercer called East on his own, clear and clean, and with enough detail that Crane, on the west, could build a complete picture from it. She kept moving. Colonel Victoria Hale was not what Lena had built in her head from the voice on the radio. The voice had suggested someone older. Hale was 42 at most, tall, lean, with close-cropped dark hair going gray at the temples, and the kind of posture that wasn't parade ground posture, but the posture of someone who'd spent a long time operating in environments where presenting. A smaller physical profile was a survival instinct. Her uniform was impeccable in the way that meant it was always impeccable, not that she'd made a special effort tonight. She was standing when Lena entered the command building conference room. Not behind the desk beside it, arms crossed, looking at the door as it opened. The posture of someone who'd been pacing and had recently stopped. Graves was in the corner. Ward was against the wall to the left of the door, arms at his sides, face arranged in careful neutrality. The civilian from the debrief room was not present. Close the door, Hale said. Lena closed it, came to attention without being told. At ease. Hale studied her for a moment, not assessing in Ward's methodical way, but confirming something against a mental image she'd already formed. Sit down. They both sat. Graves and Ward stayed standing, which established the geometry of the room clearly. I've been reviewing your performance record from this week, Hale said, without preamble, without warmth or the absence of warmth. Just information, delivered at a pace that expected you to keep up. Pit evaluation, the VIP 7 scenario, the debrief assessment from the external team. She put both hands flat on the table. And I've been reviewing the background verification that Graves initiated. Yes, ma'am. I know what's in your sealed record. Lena held the colonel's gaze. Then, you have a higher access tier than the external team. Yes. Hale didn't explain how or why. It wasn't Lena's business, and she knew it. I know the program designation. I know your role within it. I know the name of your program lead, and I know what happened to him. She paused on the last part, a brief pause, a fraction of a second, but deliberate. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you, ma'am. I'm also going to tell you that what I know about your record changes the conversation we're having right now in ways that are going to be uncomfortable. Hale looked at her steadily. You know that, I suspected. How much did the external team tell you? That the scenario was designed to have a correct solution that most assessment leads don't find, and that my background flag was the reason they were here. She paused. The rest I inferred. Hale glanced at Ward, then back. Then let me be direct, because I don't have time to be otherwise. There are two conversations happening simultaneously outside this room about what to do with you. First conversation wants to pull your CIDT assignment and redirect you to a specific operational advisory role that I'm not authorized to name in this setting, but that you'd recognize if I did. The second conversation wants to do the same thing, but argues that this program is a waste of your capability, regardless of the destination. She put her hands together on the table. I am not part of either conversation. I am the commanding officer of this installation, and you are a candidate in a program under my authority, and I called you in here tonight because before any of those conversations reaches a conclusion, I want to know what you want. The room was quiet. Outside distantly, she could hear the radio traffic from the ongoing night evolution. The interdiction window was active. Mercer and Crane coordinating, the support element moving. I want to complete the CIDT, Lena said. Why? I already answered that question today. You answered it for the external team. Answer it for me. She looked at Hale directly. Because the most useful thing I can do, given what I know and what I've been trained to do, is put it in other people, not keep running it myself. She paused. My program lead spent 11 years operating at the highest level of what he did. In the last 3 years of his life, he told me that the 11 years of operating had produced less lasting value than 6 months of teaching. That the missions ended, and the intelligence decayed, and the operational impact dissolved. But the people he'd trained, they were still working. Still using what he'd given them. She held Hale's gaze. He was right. And I wasted the last year I could have spent learning how he taught. She stopped. I'm not wasting the rest of it. Hale was quiet for a moment. Not the thoughtful quiet of someone processing, the decided quiet of someone who'd already processed and was now choosing how to proceed. The CIDT is a 10-week program, she said. You have 6 weeks remaining. Yes, ma'am. If you complete it successfully, the certification gives you instructor authorization at this facility and 3 others in the regional network. She looked at Lena. That's not nothing, but it's also not the ceiling of what someone with your record could be doing. I know. The people who want to pull your assignment aren't wrong about your capability. I know that too. Lena met her eyes. They're wrong about where it's best spent. Hale studied her for one more moment. Then she unclasped her hands and leaned back slightly, the first relaxation in her posture since Lena had entered the room. Ward, she said. Ma'am. Ward straightened off the wall. Candidate Cross returns to the evolution tonight, if there's time remaining. But tomorrow's schedule stands. She looked at Lena. The external team's assessment goes in your record as distinguished performance. Background verification closes without finding cause for reassignment. She paused. The other conversations can run their course. My recommendation will be filed separately. What will it say? Lena said. Hale looked at her. That you belong in this program, and that when you finish it, this facility would be fortunate to keep you. She stood. Dismissed, candidate. Lena stood, came to attention. One more thing. Hale said, and something in her voice shifted, not softer exactly, but less official. The register of one professional, acknowledging something personal to another. The man in your program. What he told you about teaching, he was right. I've seen it from the other side. The people I trained in my 2nd year are running operations I couldn't run now. She looked at Lena. Matters. Yes, ma'am, Lena said. I know. She walked out. The night evolution was still active when she reached the eastern ridge. 12 minutes remained in the interdiction window. Came up behind Mercer's position and pressed 2 fingers against his shoulder blade, the signal she'd established with Crane for friendly approach. Don't react. He didn't react. He'd felt her coming before the signal. She could tell from the micro adjustment in his posture that happened about 3 seconds before she touched him. She settled into position beside him. Windows still open, he said, breath level. I know. What do I have? East gate is clear. Vehicle staging is clear. Target structure, 2nd floor. 1 contact moved to the south window 4 minutes ago and hasn't moved since. He didn't ask where she'd been or why. The radio had told him command level, and that was enough. Crane, West has 3 contacts. Ground floor, north side of the structure. Port element is staged at the rally point. A pause. They're waiting on east confirmation before Reyes moves. She looked at the east structure. The 2nd floor contact at the south window static position. Likely an observer. East gate clear. The vehicle staging clear. East is clear for approach, she said into the team channel. South window has 1 static contact, 2nd floor. If Reyes takes the north entry, that contact can't see the approach angle until Reyes is inside the structure. Crane's voice copy. Calling it. A beat. Support element. You are clear to move. North entry. On your mark. Reyes's voice moving. She and Mercer watched in silence as the support element crossed from the rally point to the structure's north face 5 figures, moving in the practice single file that compressed their visual signature against the dark structure wall. The 2nd floor contact at the south window didn't shift. The interdiction sequence completed clean at 2,158. 3 minutes before the window closed. Ward's voice on the command channel, evolution complete. All teams recall. She lay in the shallow depression for a moment after the call. The ground was cold against her chest, and her right shoulder was aching specifically, and the sky above her was the particular Arizona black that had no light pollution. To soften it, just stars. Fixed ones, and the ones that moved, and the cold coming down from a long way up. Mercer lay beside her. He hadn't moved to the recall yet either. Command pole? He said. Yeah, above Ward level? Base command. He processed that without comment. Then, you're staying in the program. Yes. They tried to pull you. Turned her head. He was looking at the sky. Something like that. And you said no. Something like that. He was quiet for a moment. Huh. He said it the way someone says something, when the information has confirmed a theory they'd been running, but hadn't committed to yet. Then he stood up, picked up his gear, and started down the ridge line toward the recall point. She got up and followed. The debrief the following morning was scheduled for 800 in the main classroom. Ward ran it the same way. He ran all debriefs sequentially, objectively, without praise or condemnation, but with the kind of precision that made the analysis function as both. He got to the East team's performance and paused for a slightly longer beat than usual. East observation team encountered an unscheduled command pull during the final approach window, he said. Team lead departed the position with 3 minutes to window open. The remaining team member held the position alone, completed the target identification sequence, and coordinated interdiction timing without a 2-person team. He looked at his notes. The approach was slightly slower than the West team's timeline. The target identification was more detailed. Another beat. Both are consistent with a single operator running a 2-person task. He looked up. The room was quiet. Mercer. Ward said it the way he said most names flat, without inflection. Sir, how'd you adjust for the missing sightline angle when Cross departed? Mercer sat with his hands on the table, the slight forward lean of someone presenting information rather than defending a position. Moved my observation point 6 feet north along the ridge. Gave up the vehicle staging sightline, but kept the east gate and the south window. Accepted the gap and reported it as a gap, instead of reporting coverage I didn't have. Why accept the gap instead of trying to compensate? Because compensating for a 2-person sightline alone would have meant movement. Movement would have been visible. He paused. A gap in the report is a problem. Compromised position is a worse one. Ward wrote something. Correct prioritization. He looked at Lena Cross. Command pull timing. Sir, you had 3 minutes to window. Yes, sir. You could have requested a delay. I requested 5 minutes. It was declined. Why did you comply immediately? The question had a right answer and an honest answer. And Ward was asking for both because he always asked for both. Because the order came from base command level, and declining it wasn't an option that served me or the program. She paused. And because Mercer could hold the position. Ward looked at her. You trusted that? Yes, sir. Based on what? She thought about the 40 minutes in the training annex. The 8-minute sound event. The way he'd adjusted his observation point 6 feet north rather than report coverage he didn't have. Pattern recognition, she said. Practice. Ward looked back at his notes. He wrote something else. Then he moved to the next evolution element, and the room exhaled slightly and went back to listening. After the debrief, in the corridor, Obi fell in beside Lena without preamble. Graves filed a report this morning, she said. I didn't read it. But I saw it go through the administrative system during the early rotation. I know. The background verification is closed. I know. Obi glanced at her. You're not surprised by any of this. I'm surprised by some of it. Which part? Lena thought about Hale's voice, shifting at the end the small, real moment, at the edge of the official one. People I trained in my second year are running operations I couldn't run now. Matters. The part where people I didn't expect to understand it, understood it, she said. Obi considered that, then nodded. The decisive nod of someone filing information in the correct category. They walked out into the morning. The Arizona sun was already doing its flat aggressive work on the training grounds, burning the cold out of the air with the efficiency of something that had been doing the same thing for a very long time. Mercer was at the pull-up rack, working through a slow set that wasn't about the reps. He looked up when they came out, met Lena's eyes across the gravel, and gave her the same small nod he did the first morning after the pit. Different weight to it now. The kind of nod that accumulates meaning over time, the way words do when you say them enough times in enough different contexts that they carry more than their original definition. She nodded back. Then she went to get her gear for the day's first evolution, which Ward had listed on the board as Advanced Combatives Instruction. Practicum candidates will teach. Not run, not compete, teach. She read the board twice. 3 times. Felt something settle in her chest that had been displaced and moving for a long time. The first practicum began in 40 minutes. She was going to be ready. The practicum board said, candidates will teach, and nobody in the group knew what that meant until they were standing in the main training bay at 840 with Ward at the front, and 12 junior Marines fresh intake. First week, kind of faces that were still figuring out where everything was sitting in 2 rows on the floor mats looking up at them. Ward said, each PSI-DT candidate will take a 15-minute block. Pick the subject, you teach it. The standard is simple. If they can do what you showed them by the end of your block, you passed. Can't, you didn't. He looked at the group. Who's first? Nobody volunteered immediately. Not because they were afraid, because they were recalibrating. Fighting was one thing, and standing in front of 12 people and being responsible for whether they understood something was a different cognitive load entirely, and the room needed 30 seconds to find its footing. Brick went first. He picked a basic fall break sequence, how to hit the ground without destroying your wrist or your shoulder, and taught it the patient with the patient slightly awkward sincerity of someone who genuinely wanted the people in front of him to not get hurt. He demonstrated 3 times, walked the junior Marines through it individually, corrected 2 of them on elbow position, and by the end of the block, all 12 could execute a controlled backward fall without flinching away from the impact. Ward made a mark on his clipboard. Not praise, just the mark. Reyes went second. His block was tighter defensive positioning against a larger opponent, and he taught it with the compressed efficiency of someone who'd given information under time pressure before and knew how to strip a concept. Its essential skeleton without losing accuracy. The junior Marines had more trouble with his block because the concept required coordination between two simultaneous adjustments, and two of them couldn't sync it in the 15-minute window. Ward marked that too. Different kind of mark. Lena watched all of it. She was scheduled 9th, which gave her enough time to watch 8 different approaches to the same basic problem, how to move information from one person's body into mine and another person's. And note what worked, what didn't, and why. What worked? Demonstration before explanation. Showing the movement, letting the junior Marine's visual processing absorb the shape of it before asking the verbal brain to engage. Brick had done this instinctively. Reyes had explained first and lost 2 of them before he got to the physical demonstration. What didn't work? Expecting the first repetition to mean anything. The body didn't learn from watching it, learned from repetition under specific feedback. 2 of the middle candidates had demonstrated once, sent the junior Marines to practice, and then circulated correcting errors without having established what correct felt like first. Mercer went 7th. He picked up striking defense, the same category of movement that had been the substance of their first days in the pit, the movement he'd used to take her down on day 4, before he'd understood what he was dealing with. Taught it clean and precise, without performance, without the subtle showing off that had characterized his early days in the program. He demonstrated at full speed once, then broke it into 3 components and built them back up progressively. And when he got to the point where the junior Marines were putting the components together, he stopped correcting them individually and instead ran the room calling cues that applied to all of them simultaneously, letting the group self-correct against each other instead of waiting for him to fix each one. Good teaching. Better than Lena had expected, not because she underestimated him, but because the specific skill of reading a room full of learners and adjusting the method in real time was something most people didn't develop without being forced to. She filed that away. When his block ended, Ward said adequate, which, in Ward's vocabulary, was significant. He'd said nothing to the previous 6. Mercer walked to the back of the room and stood beside Lena. His breathing had been elevated during the block. She could hear it coming back down now. It's harder than it looks, he said, quiet enough to not carry. Yes, she said. I kept wanting to just show them instead of waiting for them to figure it out. I know. How do you resist that? She thought about it honestly. You remember that when you show them, they learn what you did. When they figure it out, they learn what to do. She glanced at him. Takes longer. Sticks further. He was quiet for a moment. He told you that. Yeah. Obi went 8th. She picked pressure point control, joint manipulation, and pain compliance, and taught it with the investigator's systematic precision, building from anatomy first to application second. And every junior Marine in her block could execute the basic wrist control by the end, because she'd made certain they understood the mechanical reason before she asked them to do the physical thing. Ward said proficient for Obi's block. It was the highest mark he'd given all morning. Then he looked at the back of the room. Cross. She walked to the front without knowing exactly what she was going to teach until she was standing there. That wasn't carelessness. It was the result of watching 8 blocks and understanding that the most useful thing she could give these particular 12 people first week intake, not yet formed in their physical habits, still at the stage where everything felt foreign and nothing felt automatic, was not a technique. It was a framework. Stand up, she said to the junior Marines. They stood. Pick a partner, someone roughly your size. Shuffling, pairing. 30 seconds. Face each other. Don't touch. Just look. She paused. Now tell me, what does the person across from you lead with? Right side or left side? Silence. Uncertain looks. You can see it from their stance. Their feet. Look at their hips. Look at where their weight sits. She waited. right side or left side. Pick one. The room started answering quietly, at first, then with more confidence, as the junior Marines looked at each other and understood that, yes, there was information available in a person's stance before they moved, and no, they hadn't been paying attention to it until 30 seconds ago. That's the first thing, she said. Before any technique, before any sequence, you read what's in front of you. Not what you expect, not what the drill says should be there. What's actually there? She looked across the room. Technique only works if it fits the situation. The situation is always changing. So you learn to read first and act second. She demonstrated on Crane, who she pulled from the CIDT group because she needed someone whose reactions would be genuine rather than performed for the junior Marine's benefit. She ran a slow-motion exchange, nothing flashy, nothing complex, but called her own reads aloud as she moved. He's leading right. Weight forward. Hip angle says he's going to extend. I'm going left before he commits. Then she ran it at full speed. Then she asked the junior Marines to run it with their partners. The room became loud movement, contact, the specific chaos of 12 pairs of people trying to do something they'd just been shown for the first time. She moved through the room, not correcting technique, but correcting attention. You're looking at his hands. Look at his hips. His hands follow his hips. His hips tell you first. At the 12-minute mark, something happened that she hadn't planned, but had hoped for two of the junior Marines. A stocky corporal and a lean private, who'd been paired by chance, started genuinely reading each other. She could see it in the timing of their movement, the small adjustments that came a fraction of a second before contact rather than after it. They weren't doing anything complicated, but they were doing it from information rather than from reaction. Stop the room. Watch those two, she said. The room watched. The corporal and the private continued, self-conscious now, but the thing they'd found didn't go away because people were looking. It was already in their bodies. That, Lena said. That's what I'm talking about. Ward's pen had stopped moving. She brought the block home, synthesized the read-first principle back to the practical application, gave them a single specific drill to take into their own practice time, and released them at exactly the 15-minute mark. The room was quiet for a moment after she stepped back. Ward wrote something, more than he'd written for any previous block. He wrote for nearly 20 seconds, which in a 15-minute assessment was a long time to spend on a single mark. He didn't say adequate. He didn't say proficient. He said, that's the job. She hadn't heard him say that before. She didn't think the other CIDT candidates had either, from the way the room received it, slightly held breath. The particular silence of people recognizing that something's been said that won't be repeated. The remaining weeks of the CIDT did not get easier. Ward had never intended them to get easier. The back half of the program was designed to build on the front half's foundation by removing the conditions that made the front half manageable. Less time, less information, more variables. The scenarios got more complex, the classroom requirements got more demanding, and the teaching practicum blocks became a weekly evolution rather than a one-time assessment. Lena taught 7 more blocks over the final 6 weeks. Each one was different. She adjusted the subject based on what the junior Marine intake needed in that specific week, not what she was most comfortable demonstrating. Not what made her look most capable, but what the people in front of her actually needed. Some blocks were tactical, some were physical. One was almost entirely conceptual. An hour she spent on decision-making under pressure, using scenarios rather than physical demonstration, walking the junior Marines through the architecture of how good decisions get made when there's no time and incomplete information, and the cost of being wrong is not hypothetical. Ward attended that block. He sat in the back and said nothing for the entire hour, and afterward wrote something in his program, notes that Lena never saw, but that Graves referenced 2 weeks later in a separate conversation. The group fractured and reformed over those 6 weeks the way all small groups do under sustained pressure. Old tensions dissolved. New ones emerged. Some of both were resolved, and some were not. Mercer and Lena never became what anyone would call friends, exactly. What they became was more specific and less social, the kind of relationship that forms between two people who have been genuinely useful to each other in conditions that required it, where the usefulness is the bond and the social layer is secondary, because it was never the point. He trained with her twice a week in the annex. He stopped showing off informal evolutions, not because he'd been told to, but because he'd noticed that performance was costing him something he couldn't easily name and had decided the cost wasn't worth it. He was better for it. Ward noticed. His block assessments in the teaching practicum moved from adequate to effective to, in the 7th week, strong. Mercer read that marking on the board and stood in front of it for a moment without expression. Then he walked away and didn't mention it, which was itself the most genuine response he could have had. Brick psychologically, professionally, Brick Hollander mailed a letter home every week. In the 8th week, he received one back that left him sitting on the building steps in the dark for 40 minutes. Lena didn't ask what it said. She sat on the lower step and kept him company for 20 of those minutes before he said thanks in a voice that meant more than the word. And she said, "Yeah," and went inside. Obi filed a formal complaint in week 6 against a training protocol she considered safety deficient, the night observation exercise that ran without adequate comms backup for solo operators. She was right about the deficiency and wrong about the channel she used to raise it, which created a complicated administrative situation that Ward handled by updating the protocol and documenting that the improvement had come from candidate feedback, which was technically accurate and resolved the situation without making it worse for anyone. Obi's block assessment in the teaching practicum went from proficient to distinguished in week 8. Crane continued being Crane competent, strategic, quietly the most technically complete candidate in the group, the one who everyone knew was going to complete the program and probably wind up running it someday. He and Lena developed a habit of running the after-action review, together informally before the official debrief, 10 minutes in the corridor, going through what had worked and what hadn't, with the directness of two people who'd decided that honest was faster than tactful. The CIDT final evaluation ran over 3 days in the 10th week. Ward designed the final assessment structure himself, the way he designed everything, with the accumulated intention of someone who'd been thinking about it since week 1 and had spent the intervening weeks watching 12 candidates reveal what they were actually made of. Day 1 was physical. The full assessment circuit from intake, run again every station, same standards, measured against the Day 1 results. Not for comparison between candidates, but for individual baseline tracking. The program's theory was that you couldn't know what someone had become if you didn't know where they'd started. Lena ran it at a different pace than Day 1. Not faster, across the board, faster in the stations that rewarded efficiency over strength, which she'd always had, and notably faster in the weighted carry, which she'd been working specifically for 5 weeks, because she'd identified the inefficiency in her technique during week 3 and had spent the remaining time correcting it. She was 4th overall. Day 1, she'd been 7th. 3 positions in 10 weeks was not a dramatic leap. It was also the most honest possible gap, the exact width of what she'd actually improved rather than what she could have performed if she'd been trying her hardest in week 1. Ward noted the gap in his assessment. He noted the specific stations that had improved and the ones that hadn't, which included her right shoulder, which remained a managed problem rather than a solved one, and which she'd disclosed to the medical officer in week 4, when it became clear that managing it indefinitely was going to affect her long-term function. Day 2 was the final scenario evolution, the most complex scenario the program ran, called VIP or 9, which was related to the week 2 VIP or 7 assessment only in designation structure. Actual scenario was a full compound clearance with multi-room personnel recovery, full OPFR load, degraded comms, and a 7-minute extraction window. Ward assigns assessment, lead to OB. Lena ran East team again with Crane. It was a deliberate pairing, two people who'd developed a genuine operational shorthand, put together for the hardest evolution, not as a favor, but as a test of whether the shorthand held under the most demanding conditions. It held. Obi ran the scenario with a precision that surprised even Ward. She'd built a contingency structure that was 4 layers deep, which was 2 more than the scenario required. And when the 3rd layer activated, because the OP4 made an unexpected move, in the 4th minute, she already had the adjusted call ready. The scenario completed in 6 minutes 40 seconds. 20 seconds inside the window. Ward said, "That's the program." Day 3 was the teaching evaluation. Each candidate ran a 30-minute block, double the practicum length, with a full junior Marine platoon of 24. No preparation time. Ward handed them the subject at the door, combat decision-making under time pressure. It was Lena's subject. The same framework she'd taught in the informal block 7 weeks earlier. She didn't know if Ward had assigned it to her deliberately or by rotation. Decided it didn't matter. The subject was the subject. She taught it to 24 people she'd never seen before, in a room with Ward and Graves, and when she was 10 minutes in, Colonel Hale sitting in the back. And she taught it the same way she would have taught it if none of them had been there, because the only version of teaching that worked was the one that didn't change based on who was watching. At the 26-minute mark, the same thing happened that had happened in week 1 with the corporal, and the private 2 junior Marines found it. The actual thing, the real read first, then act reflex, running in real time. Stopped the room. She pointed it out. She let the room watch. Then she brought the block home. She was 4 minutes over the 30-minute limit when she finished. It was the only time standard miss in her entire assessment record. Ward marked it. He also marked something else, longer, in a separate section of the evaluation form she hadn't seen before. The certification ceremony at Iron Ridge was not elaborate. Ward had never been interested in elaborate. There was a formation, a reading of assessment results, and a handshake one per candidate. Ward's grip firm and brief in communicating, in its brevity, that the work was what mattered, and the ceremony was administrative. 9 of the 12 candidates completed the program. 3 had been released across the 10 weeks, 1 in week 4, for a physical injury that couldn't be cleared, 1 in week 6 for a standards failure in the teaching practicum, 1 in week 8 by mutual agreement, after it became clear that the candidate's skill set was exceptional in field operations and genuinely unsuited for instruction work, which was treated as information rather than failure. The 9 who remained stood in formation in the same field where the program had started, under the same flat Arizona light, with the same gravel under their boots and the same heat pressing down from a sky that had no interest in softening itself. Ward stood in front of them and did not give a speech. He gave a single sentence. The Corps needed instructors. Now it has 9 more. That was all. The handshake line started from the left. Brick first, who shook Ward's hand with both of his and said something that made Ward's expression shift slightly towards something that wasn't quite a smile. Reyes, precise and brief. Obi, who looked Ward in the eye and said thank you in a way that sounded like she meant it as a peer rather than a subordinate. Mercer went 5th. He shook Ward's hand and then stopped the briefest pause. Not quite a hesitation, something he'd decided to do rather than something that happened to him. He said, "I came in here thinking I was already good enough." Ward said, "You were." "That's not a compliment." "No," Ward said. "Not." Mercer nodded once, moved down the line. Lena went 8th. Ward shook her hand. His grip was the same as everyone else's, firm, brief, professional. But he held it for 1 extra beat. And in that beat, he looked at her with the expression she'd first seen in week 3 when she'd completed the Bar 7 assessment, the expression of a man updating a file in real time and finding the new information better than expected. "You're staying on," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." Hale filed the recommendation last week. Permanent instructor assignment, Combat Training Division. He released her hand. You'll have your own intake group in 6 weeks. I know. They'll underestimate you, he said. The first group always does. I know that too. He looked at her one more moment. Good, he said, with the particular finality of a man who's said everything he intends to say on a subject. She moved down the line. Graves shook her hand at the end of the formation line and said, the background verification file is closed. Permanently. He said it the way he said most things, flat, direct, faster than any other method. If anyone tries to reopen it for reassignment purposes, they'll run into Colonel Hale's recommendation as a standing block. He paused. For what it's worth. It's worth something, she said. He nodded, filed that away somewhere, moved on. The afternoon following the ceremony was unstructured, the first unstructured time. The CDT candidates had been given in 10 weeks, produced the slightly disoriented quality of a population that had been operating on a schedule so complete that its absence felt like a missing floor. Most of the group drifted to the mess, or the common room, or outside to sit in the sun, doing nothing specific. Brick mailed another letter. Reyes started reading a different tactical manual, which was Reyes' version of relaxing. Lena went to the training annex. Not to train. She sat on the mat against the far wall, in the same place she'd been sitting the night she'd found Mercer writing in his notebook, and she didn't do anything for a while. Annex was empty and quiet and smelled like chalk and rubber mat, and the specific functional smell of a room that had been used hard for a long time and would be used hard again soon. She took the photograph out of her breast pocket. She looked at it for the first time in a while. The man with the coffee mug, the desert she couldn't name, the grin that had been his default expression in moments of genuine satisfaction. He'd been satisfied by small things, a trainee who finally got it, a plan that held under pressure, coffee that wasn't terrible. She looked at it for a long time. Then she put it back. The door opened. Mercer stood in the frame, looked at her, looked at the empty annex. You're not training, he said. No. He came in anyway. Sat on the mat about 6 feet away, back against the wall, knees up. They'd sat like this before the night evolution, the steps of Building C, the various edges of various days over 10 weeks. It had become a posture they shared without assigning it a name. Crane's leaving Friday, he said. Regional rotation. I know, he told me. Obi got the federal investigative track offer. He paused. She's taking it. Good. You don't think she should stay here? Think she should do what she's built for? Lena looked at the far wall of the annex. Same as everyone. Mercer was quiet for a moment. What about you? I'm staying. I know you're staying. I mean, he stopped. Reformulated. Mercer reformulated when he was trying to say something accurate rather than something easy, which she'd come to recognize as one of his better qualities. What does that feel like? Staying in one place? It was a real question. She gave it a real answer. Like something I should have done sooner, she said. In exactly the right time. He accepted that. He didn't push at it. They sat in the quiet annex for another few minutes, and then he stood up, picked up a pad from the equipment wall, and started working a slow striking sequence. Against it, not combat, not training, just movement for the sake of movement. Something to do with his hands while the afternoon ran out. She watched him and said, your weight transfer on the left cross is still 8 inches past your base. I know. It'll cost you against a taller opponent. I know. He ran the sequence again. Fix it for me. She got up. The first intake group Lena Cross received as a combat instructor arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks later, in a white government van that pulled up to the main gate at 612. 11 candidates, different backgrounds, different builds, different records. One of them had a file so thin it was almost transparent, just a basic cert notation, logistics support, and a gap where more history should have been. Candidate stood at the gate with her duffel and her orders. And when the sentry ran her ID and looked up with the particular expression of someone who wasn't sure she was in the right place. She looked back at him with the calm of someone who'd been in exactly this position before, in a different role, on a different side of the equation, and said, "Which way to the processing office?" Lena was watching from the edge of the vehicle lot, 40 yards out. She'd been watching since 558, 2 minutes before she needed to be there, same as Ward had always done, because 2 minutes early meant you'd had time to observe, assess, and already know something everyone else didn't. She saw the gap in the file. She saw the way the candidate stood weight slightly forward, nothing flashy, completely present. She said nothing, made no mark on the clipboard, just watched. She'd learned from a man who was gone now and whose lessons were still running. The most important thing you could do in the first 48 hours with a new candidate was to understand what you were actually looking at before you decided what it needed. Candidate walked through the gate. The work began. Person standing quietly at the edge of the room is not waiting to be noticed. They are learning everything they need, and the moment that matters, they will already know more than anyone who spent that time looking for an audience.